I'm your host, Doreen Steenland, and today we're going to be speaking with Marcus Warner. So, why don't we just dive right in? What is the problem you are hoping to fix?
Well, the problem we're going after here is that there's a lot of low joy workplaces that are low on mature, they're low joy because they're low maturity. And what we find is what separates the leaders we love to follow from the ones we have to follow is their emotional and relational maturity. So the problem we're trying to address is, what does it look like to be a relationally mature leader? How do we stay relational, act like ourselves when things get tough? So that's the problem we're going after, is actually immaturity. So.
Wow. And so, as we're talking to medical professionals here who have studied and worked their tails off for decades, intellectually superior in many ways, there might be something missing for us as far as our workplace environment. And I think that's where you're going here.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're going. I've talked to a lot of medical professionals who are talking about a crisis in the industry today, and the crisis isn't with competence, right?
Exactly.
The crisis is with the ability to get along with other people, the ability to not, to bounce back. And so, because there's so much burnout, there's so much demand, there's so much going on. And so what we have found from the neuroscience research of my co-author, Jim Wilder, he's actually the neuroscience researcher. He's discovered that the brain wants to run on joy, but if it can't run on joy, it will run on fear. And so what I've been hearing largely from the people I know is that kind of an epidemic of things running on fear. And because of that, a high burnout rate.
Wow. Yes, and I agree. I'm hearing the same things. So, as you define maturity, this maturity that you're trying to tackle, how would you describe that to our viewers?
So maturity, we use actually the acrostic in the name of the book, RARE, to explain what maturity is, but it's the ability to remain relational and act like yourself when things are hard. The idea here is if I change who I am with every emotion I feel, people walk on eggshells around me. Like if I'm one person when I'm angry, and I'm a different person when I'm scared, and I'm a different person when I'm sad, then people are like, well, what mood is this person going to be in today? How do I interact? What's going to make them change? And so the kind of maturity we're talking about here is the ability to act like myself regardless of the emotion that I'm going through. It doesn't mean that I'm stoic, that I don't show emotion, but it means the emotion doesn't fundamentally change my values, doesn't change my character. I don't all of a sudden turn into a monster who's super angry when I don't. People know what they can count on. That's the hallmark of maturity, is that I act like myself. You know who you're going to get even when things get stressful. The other part of it is I remain relational. So those are really the two key things. And we add a couple more, and that is returning to joy. Like we all lose it now and then. Yeah. How fast can I bounce back? How quickly can I return to joy? And if I do those three things well, then that means I'm enduring hardship well. And so maturity really is to do with this idea of keeping, from a brain science perspective, we're talking about is the ability to keep the higher level brain functions active and engaged under stress. So that would probably be the scientific definition, right? How do I keep the higher level brain functions on when I'm under stress? Because there's a natural tendency in my brain to want to cramp down, shut down. And when that happens, I lose my ability to act like myself and remain relational.
Yeah, wow, so good. Because what you're saying is that when we lose it, we are not being our authentic selves.
Right.
And really, we are shifting with every single emotion. And that's a roller coaster that many of us have spent decades riding.
It's exhausting, right? Because, and it's exhausting for other people too. Because, if your staff doesn't know what to expect, if, even the patients can pick up on this, like, which doctor am I going to get today? Which, professional am I going to get today? Most of us are fine as long as we're within our threshold of the level of stress we can handle. It's that when it gets higher, we've got to find ways to create rhythm in our lives so that we can keep enough margin so that we can aren't constantly pushing ourselves past our capacity to act like ourselves. And if that's going on, we got to find some ways to make some adjustments, but we also have to be just aware of the problem. And we have some tools, in the book to try to help people do a better job of acting like themselves and remaining relational under stress.
That's great. So what I picked up, I caught a slight hint of energy that we're talking about, and how when we leave that relational aspect of the brain, it's really draining our energy.
It can go both, right? When we lose it, that relational part, I can go low energy, which tends to come out in shame, in despair, in sadness, right? There's low energy, even disgust, low energy emotions, but it can also go high energy, which is anger and fear. My world's falling apart, high energy, fear, or I am so mad at everybody. That's so I can lose it both directions. And that's kind of what happens. And we have to learn to recognize when we're slipping into functioning. And what's interesting is all these things have kind of a fear root from the way that the brain works. And that I believe you talk about the thriving part of the brain, surviving part of the brain. That's kind of what we're talking about here is I want to keep living out of the thriving part of my brain. And when I slip into that surviving part, right, in our book, we call it the fast track and the slow track. The fast track is the part of my brain that remembers who I am and acts like myself without me having to think about it. I just automatically show up. They get me, right? But if the slow track part of my brain is where I'm making decisions, where I have to think about, what's it like me to act like right now? And I can't be in that part of my brain all the time. I'll never get anything done. So we need habits, right? We need to develop some habits that just sort of automatically show up wherever we're at.
I love what you're saying, because really our brain works in those patterns. It works in patterns in like large pathways in our brain. And the more we use them, the more that we travel them. So this takes intentional practice, is what you're saying.
It does. And that's why we've included what we call maturity workouts in the book. All right. So there are workouts you can do as an individual. I can take my team through them. And some of them are as simple as learning how to take a break. Okay, I just need a pause. Okay, now I can go do this, right? It can be that simple, but then there's other things like I know of a nursing unit that decided they were going to become the happy to see you nursing unit. And this was a major Baltimore hospital, right? And the head of the nurses had been reading some of our literature and decided that this is what they want to do. So they started doing training on coaching the nurses on how to be curious with the people who came, how to share a smile with the people who came, look them in the eyes when you talk to them, just real simple things like this. There's like 4 or 5 real basic things that they started to practice. And within 3 months, they saw the patient approval ratings go up 33% on that floor. They noticed that more nurses were asking to transfer to that floor than any other, unit in the hospital. Doctors were faster to make their rounds because they liked being, around people who were happy to see them. Even the maintenance people were quicker to make repairs. And what they began to find was just creating that environment that says, we're happy to see you. We're happy that you're here, and doing simple things like making eye contact and smiling and showing curiosity, changed the whole atmosphere on the floor. And what was really interesting is at the same time, another floor went high accountability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they went total fear-based, and production fell off in that unit. And this one, the production was going up. And so that again illustrates the difference between functioning in joy versus functioning in fear and the difference it can make.
Wow. Those statistics are amazing. And we all know it to be true that when we are happy to see someone, the room just lights up, and that energy is almost contagious. And what you're describing is instead of making the fear contagious,
right,
making joy contagious in our workplace. And not only does it increase the unit's effectiveness, but it will affect the people themselves as they go home to their families, so they can make time for what's most important to them and show up for their families.
Yeah, no, I believe very strongly if we have enough happy to see you moments throughout the day, then we don't lose energy as much, and we have more energy for our families when we go home. Right. But if I've getting no happy to see you energy at work, then it sucked everything it's got out of me. By the time I go home, I'm not happy to see anybody. I don't want to be around anybody. And so what happens is my emotional capacity shrinks.
Yes.
Right. And so whereas it used to take this much, in a sense, to make me get overwhelmed. When my capacity is down, it only takes this much. And so we talk about, like, I may normally have 5 notches of emotional capacity, but after I'm drained, I may only have 1 left. And so somebody does something that normally wouldn't set me off, but I just don't have enough emotional capacity right now to deal with that. That's what we're talking about. How do we grow our emotional capacity? How do we grow our the level of stress we can handle before it causes us to shut down, blow up, or melt down?
I love what you're saying, and I want to highlight something else that's been studied by trauma informed specialists. That trauma actually decreases that what Dr. Daniel Siegel calls the window of tolerance, right? And that's what we're talking about.
It is.
Living in this place of harmony, the window of tolerance. And so, if we've experienced trauma, it shrinks that capacity that you're talking about. And I think many of our medical professionals have experienced not only trauma in their lives, but trauma in the workplace in general.
No, I think that's very true. We talk about 2 kinds of trauma primarily, and this comes from my co-author Jim Wilder, and that is he is a PhD psychologist too. He's been clinical psychologist for over 30 years. In his work, he says there's A trauma and B trauma. B trauma is the bad stuff that happens to us. We're all familiar with that. A trauma is the absence of the good things we need. And a lot of times we miss that one. And it's like, nobody was abusive to me today. So I'm like, well, I wasn't traumatized. But you can be traumatized not only by the bad things that people do to you, you can be traumatized by what you did not get that you really needed. Like, I really needed the encouragement today. I just didn't get any encouragement at all. And so I look at A trauma this way. If you want to kill a plant, how would you do it? Right. Number one answer I get is don't water it.
Right.
So the answer here is what you don't do to a plant can kill it, right? You can traumatize the plant by the absence of the good thing it needs. So don't give it enough water, don't give it the right kind of soil, don't give it the right kind of sun, and you can kill that plant. Well, in the same way, you can kill your emotional capacity development by what we don't get in life. And so that's one of the reasons why we have to be intentional about building practices into our lives to make sure that we're getting the things that we need that replenish that emotional capacity so that we are able to remain relational and act like ourselves.
Wow, so good. So let's talk about this capacity to remain relational and these relational circuits. Why are they so important?
So relational circuits, I sometimes put a switch on the side of my head like this, right? So there are 4 levels of brain function that have been identified by Dr. Wilder, right? Level 1, we call it the attachment level. So it lights up when anything's personal to me. So like if I'm in a crowd, my brain doesn't light up for everybody. But if I see someone I recognize, all of a sudden it'll go, oh, I know them, right? My brain lights up. And level 2 is the amygdala dominated level that gives us and it can only make 3 assessments. We call it the assessment level. It can assess this attachment as good, in which case my brain easy to function, or it's bad, which generates low energy emotions like, uh-oh, this is bad, right? Or this is scary, which will generate the high energy emotions that we tend to think of as fight or flight. And so that's the assessment level. Well, what happens is if the trigger that I get at that level is higher than my window of tolerance, right? If it's higher than my emotional capacity, then my brain can literally start going into a cramp and the signals won't get passed up to the higher levels of brain function. And instead of handling things from the part of my brain that remembers who I am and how to act like myself, I handle this. It'll like jump over to this other side where the problem solving part of my brain takes over, and I will treat people like they're problems, right? So instead of being relational with these people, I'm treating them like they are the problem. And that's not relational, and I tend not to act like myself when I'm doing that. So all of this hinges on this idea that this switch over here tends to go off if I get too much, if I have more cramping going on than I can handle, right? And so that if this switch goes off, then the part of my brain that remembers this is who I am, this is how I act like myself, is going to help. So the other 2 parts of the brain, just to finish this, is the cingulate, right? The cingulate cortex is the 3rd level, and that's the part of the brain that is excellent at being relational. It's it reads other people, it connects with them, it syncs with them. It's like you and I might even make eye contact over Zoom and say, I think I know what they're feeling. I think I know how, right. And it's completely nonverbal, and it's this part of the brain that's syncing up. And then the fourth part of the brain we call the action center. This is the part that reminds us how to act like ourselves. So we might think of the singular part as the primarily relational part, and then this is the right orbital prefrontal cortex, right? The part right behind my right eye that holds memories of who I am. It remembers this is who I am, this is who my people are, this is how it's like me to act. So when we say we remain relational, we act like ourselves, we're kind of referencing these top two level functions of the brain. And when this goes off, we lose access to those top levels of our brain, and that's what causes us to shut down or to blow up. So that's the idea in a nutshell.
Awesome. So good. And so a lot of this theory is based on the work of Dr. Alan Shore,
Right.
Dr. Daniel Siegel, and Dr. Jim Wilder, who are interpersonal neurobiologists.
Right.
And this whole area of study talks about the attachment and the brain and how it all functions. And it's not only so fascinating, but neuroscience is proving on a daily basis with fMRI studies which areas of the brain are lighting up and reacting and responding in response to our external stimuli.
Absolutely. So part of the story here is that Jim Wilder wrote the book with me. He began studying Alan Shore's material before it was published. Right. So he worked in Southern California, and he made the connections over here. So he was actually building models for helping his clients based off of Alan Shore's work before it was even published. Right. And so he's been doing this. He had about a 10-year head start on most of the industry in terms of not only understanding this, but beginning to use it in terms of helping people.
Yeah, so that is fascinating. So let's go right to some practical stuff here. What happens when our relational circuits go offline and that switches off? How can we get ourselves back to relational mode?
So this is our favorite tool. People tend to like. We call it cake, right? So the idea is it's a piece of cake to get back, right? So it's CAKE is the thing to remember. And you're going, first of all, how do I know when I have gone offline, right? When my brain is offline and I have become a half-brained individual, I'm not functioning with my whole brain. That's a problem. So C is curiosity. I have lost my curiosity about you. It's like, I think I have you all figured out. So if I think I have you all figured out, I've lost curiosity. And that means I don't care what you think, and I don't care how you feel.
Wow.
Right. So that's the first sign that my
Say that again for the people in the back.
Yeah. So curiosity is the first test of, have I lost my access to my high level brain functions, right? If I've gone offline, I've lost curiosity, which means I don't care what you think. I don't care how you feel, because I think I have you all figured out.
And just pause right there for a moment, because this is a huge problem I see in society as a whole.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The whole division, the us and the them. If we don't think alike, we are creating that assumption that we've got you figured out.
Absolutely. Well, in the logical next step of thinking I have you all figured out is to treat you like an object in the world instead of treating you like a person.
Yes.
Wow. Right? Because now you're just a problem that I have to deal with. You're not actually a person I have to relate to. Wow. And again, you see that in social media, you see that in politics, you see that in workplace all of the time. That is, once I think I got you figured out, you stop being a person, I stop having any moral obligation to be relational with you. Right. And I can now treat you like an object in the world. Now, I'm not thinking about all that, right? It's happening faster in my brain than I'm consciously aware of. But it's because it's become a habit. So we need to reverse that habit. So curiosity is the key thing. And it happens even to counselors, right? You hear the same kind of line of stories 100 times, and you can actually check out on a client and go, I know what's going on with this person. I have this whole figured out, and you can lose your curiosity. So we have to be careful in every profession not to, just kind of check out on people.
Yes. And so what I'm hearing there is, when we check out, our internal biases are taking over, and we're not seeing things as they really are. We're looking through a specific lens that we've already determined in our
Yeah.
heart, our minds.
So when we apply this to parenting too, it's like, if you ever had this experience where one kid walks into the room and you light up with joy, like, oh, they're walking, another kid walks in the problem. It's like, oh, problem just walked into the room. It's like, you actually, what happens is you didn't think about it. But you had an internal reaction that your brain had learned, that you were treating one kid like a person to relate to and another kid like a problem to solve. And they sense that, they pick up on that, right? So it's the same thing in the workplace, same thing in all of our relationships. People don't want to be problems to be solved, right? They want to be people to be related to.
Yes. Okay, back to your cake.
All right. So cake starts with curiosity. Starts with curiosity. Second is appreciation. Somebody I normally appreciate, I can't think of anything I appreciate about them right now. Right.
Yeah.
If you're married, you know what we're talking about. It's like,
Yes.
it's like, I appreciate this person, but every now and then something happens. So like, I cannot remember what I like about this person. It's like, it's all gone. That's a sign that the part of my brain that is relational and acting like myself has gone offline. The second is kindness. I'm normally a kind person, but right now I can't think of what that would even look like. I do not feel like being kind right now. So if I've lost any impulse to kindness, right, that's a sign that my relational circuits are off. And also eye contact. You may notice a lot of conversations, you find yourself looking around everywhere but the person, right? And if you're looking everywhere but the person in a conversation, it's a sign that your relational circuits are offline. And so you got to restore that. So that's first the diagnosis. How do you recognize that this is happening? The fix is also cake, which is nice. And that is, I break eye contact, look away. And now I'm in the left hemisphere problem solving part of my brain. And I'm thinking to myself, how do I solve the problem of getting this part of my brain back online? Instead of going, I'm trying to solve the problem of the person sitting across from me, I'm trying to solve the problem, my internal problem of getting myself whole brained again. So I do that I got to find some curiosity. I got to find some appreciation. I got to find some kindness. Right. Once I find it, like, is there anything I can be curious about? Is there anything I can appreciate about this person? Can I think of a way to be kind? If I can't find it, then I may not even want to continue this conversation. I might want to come back to it later. But if I can, once I find some curiosity, appreciation, or kindness, now I restore eye contact. And now I can look at them again, because now the relational circuits in my brain are on. I don't even have to say anything at that point. I'm just back. Kind of like my actual self is back and online and present with you right now. We can continue. So cake is the core tool we use to help people identify when they're not being relational and how do you get back to it.
That's awesome. And so what I hear you saying is, when we're checking out, we need to check in.
Very good. Yeah, you're good with those words. I like that. You got to thrive and to survive, and to check out and check. That's absolutely right. That's what we're saying.
Yeah. So take that moment and pause and get curious and ask yourself some questions. Now, in my work, I follow I also incorporate positive intelligence. So for me, I do quick PQ reps, what we call them PQ reps, where we focus on sensory issues. And that also fast tracks you right to the right side of the brain, where we could potentially tap into some of those higher functions and get that switch back on.
No, and that's absolutely correct. I've got another book you held up earlier called Building Bounce, and that's I wrote that with a children's therapist who helps traumatized children restore their joy in life, and that tactile stuff is very important. We have actually we have a lot of acrostics in there. It's kind of how I teach. So we have one called Best Practices for quieting my body from upset emotions, and it's BEST. So best practices and it's like breathe in a box, exaggerate the emotion before you calm it, and then soothe, right? The tactile stuff, soothe yourself. Sometimes just rubbing your arms on your shoulders, like you're rubbing the stress right out, tensing and releasing, but getting connected to things that are tactile would really be a good word to use for what we mean in that.
Yeah, so good. So can you give us maybe an example of a maturity workout that you talk about in the book?
So the first one is we introduce these best practices, right? And that is, okay, so practice right now breathing in a box. So the way we teach it to little kids is actually way more fun. And that is, we call it blow on the soup and smell the soup, right? It's like, and then, but the idea is fill your lungs, empty your lungs. And part of what we're trying to do is get control of our body back from the emotional hijack that just took place. So we're teaching people, a lot of people just don't know basic things like that. Like when I do get stressed out, when I do get overwhelmed, what do I need to do? So we introduce these best practices, tell them practice this for just a couple of minutes. Then another maturity workout would be appreciation. And that is the fastest way to rewire your brain from fear to joy is the practice of 5 minutes of appreciation. So I find with really smart people sometimes struggle with this because they get what I call a left brain attack. And that is they're really good at gratitude. And that is they're good at saying thank you,
Yeah.
but they're not actually all that good at appreciation, right? Appreciation is more of, I tell you, it's the difference between noticing that there's a pretty sunset and taking 5 minutes to enjoy it.
Yes.
All right. It's the difference between remembering when that thing happened and actually letting yourself re-enter into the memory and re-feel those feelings again. So again, my colleague, Dr. Wilder, as a psychologist, used to, one of the most common exercises he gave his clients was take 5 minutes 3 times a day to practice appreciation. So we give some tools for how you do that. Because we're trying to help people rewire their brain to move from fear to joy, to get control of their emotions. And then we have cake is in there. We have talk about that. And we have also one of the bigger things I find people are dealing with today is shame. So we have a maturity workout just related to shame. And that is, how do you remain relational when somebody has shamed you?
Yeah.
That's a really, that's a really challenging, one of the hardest things for people. In fact, Dr. Wilder's short definition of narcissism is an inability to return to joy from shame. Because what happens is if my narcissistic tendencies come out when somebody shames me and I flip it back on them because I can't handle it. Mm-hmm. Or I throw somebody else under the bus because I can't handle shame. So so we have to practice. And that the first thing we have people practice is to catch myself self-justifying. Like if somebody criticizes me, is my initial reaction to justify myself and throw somebody else under the bus? If so, I got to start catching that and get rid of that out of my life, because self-justification and throwing other people out of the bus are two main ways that I handle shame in a narcissistic fashion rather than in a emotionally healthy fashion. And there is no faster way to lose trust with your team than to be throwing other people under the bus. Yes. And not accepting ownership for the things that we do wrong.
So good. Oh my goodness, this has been amazing. And I'm hearing from you the first step towards changing and rewiring these paths is becoming aware that you've actually left the relational mode and have gone into almost an enemy mode, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we are then treating people like they are your enemy instead of your friend, your colleague, your family member, your spouse, your kids, right? All the love that we should be feeling kind of gets pushed aside and fear gets put on a pedestal.
Exactly. And it's funny, my colleague Jim, his newest book is called Escaping Enemy Mode.
Yes.
Right. So you're right on the spot there with, again, Chris Corsi and I wrote a book on joy-filled marriages. Yeah. And one of the things we talk about there is that in every relationship, there's a joy gap. And the joy gap is the amount of time between experiences of joy. Excuse me. So if in my marriage, for example, I am measuring the gap of experiences of joy with my wife in hours, I've got a good marriage. If I am measuring the experience of joy with my wife in weeks and months, all right, things are not good. Right? There's a problem here, because the bigger that joy gap gets, the easier it is for resentment and fear and anger and things we don't want to start, slipping in there. It's the same not only in marriage, but it's the same in any relationship, right? And that is, we need to learn how to keep the joy gap in our lives shorter. And so if we can't always control how other people treat us. So we have to build times into our day where I'm going to take 5 minutes, right? So that I can reset myself, I can recalibrate. And that's the good news. It doesn't need to take more than 5 minutes.
And I just want to give these medical professionals a shout out here. We thank you for all that you're doing, but you are worthy of 5 minutes a day to build your capacity and enhance your relationships.